Salutations. On my way here, I was thinking why people leave the countryside for the cities. Sometimes not necessarily for better, but still they move. There was an opening, there was a vacant place, there was an opportunity, so people change. It is often when we are young, we have this spirit of adventure, I would say. We are willing to take risks, to try different things. So we moved because there was an opening, there was an opportunity. There's cases in which people return from where they come from. They just return. They're like, nah, I was so much better off. Yeah, it's the countryside. Yeah, we don't have, the excitement of the city, but at least, yeah, the economy is poorer. Yeah, but some people return, rightfully so. But pride can sometimes get into the picture, and people are like stubborn. They're like, oh, I'm not going to return now, even though I switch for something worse. I'm not going to return. It's almost like admitting defeat, and everybody's going to make fun of me anyway. Once upon a time, people got together uh, because they had a small pool for where to from which to choose from, so they end up marrying their childhood friends. Yeah. If you move to the city, it becomes something else entirely. From thousands or hundreds of population, you go to millions, and everybody is almost like a stranger, even though they are neighbors. They don't know each other because the per capita just becomes impossible for you to memorize. You see, in a small village, everybody knows each other. We have the ability to memorize at least 300 faces and names and respective, lives and acquaintances. We have a genealogical tree, most people have, that live in rural areas. Oh, you know so and so? Oh, yeah, it's the brother of so and so, it's son in law, blah, 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 blah. Everybody is connected in a network. But in a city, it's impossible because once you reach a certain size, it's just impossible for us to encapsulate. So, how do we manage a city? The military system, of course. Everything is in need to know basis. Everybody, follows the hierarchy. Everybody follows the orders, the rules of a military culture. That's how we manage cities. Anyway, everything is compartmentalized, you know. So that's how you manage a city. So in the city, you don't, end up marrying your school friends. It becomes, the pool from which to choose becomes a lot bigger, and therefore temptation also becomes a lot bigger. Therefore, you know, people are going to cheat, and there's going to be divorces. So I think living in the rural areas, there will be more stability in almost everything. But why do people move to the cities? Not necessarily because the cities grew in size or grew in opportunities. No, it's because there was a vacant place. You see, some 40 years ago, around these parts, almost nobody moved to the city because what? There wasn't enough room. People had big families in the city and in the countryside. So every parcel, every bit of the territory was occupied, you see, because families was 3, 4, 5, 6, 12, sometimes even bigger. Yeah. 12 children. Wow. Yeah. Why am I talking about this? You see, because people kind of abandoned the countryside, ever since the pill became available, small families started becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. And the city life, just became more attractive because there was more opportunities. people from the countryside just move because there's something different, there's a place, there's an opportunity. It doesn't end up in the city. They go literally abroad, like myself, end up traveling abroad because there was an opportunity, there was an opening. So I went, you know, because people are not reproducing. More openings, are showing up. We have people coming from the other side of the world. Yeah. They travel 12 hours on a plane to come here and work here because there was an opportunity, there is an opening. This whole globalization thing is enabled because of that. Yeah. Well, there's opportunities because of lack of population, and of course development in technology. We can easily travel. What used to take months, it's now made in days or hours. It's amazing. How culture, a lot of people talk about the proto-Europeans, right? That there is similarities between the Iberian Peninsula, North Europe, Persia, and India. That there's similarities in the language, there's similarities in culture, and what they have in common, is that there used to be a trade route. People using donkeys and camels used to travel those and trade. The most important trade was not gold or food. Once upon a time, the most important, most valuable thing was what? Knowledge, culture. That was the most important thing. So people would travel from place to place, which would last years. So if you started in India, right, and you wanted to visit the Iberian Peninsula, right, you would start at the age of 20, and you probably got married on the way, had kids, and when you arrived at destination, you were probably already a grandfather. So then you ask, how did language and traditions mingled? Of course they mingled. You started in around India with an Indian accent. Then you had kids or got married, and you had a Persian accent, you know, and that's how things get mixed. Well, nowadays people can't really wrap their heads around because you travel around the world in 12 hours. But once upon a time, it took a lifetime. You know, that's how culture spread. That's why there's similarities. That's why there's similarities between the Proto-Indo-Europeans. So in the end, it's all one people. Anyway, yeah, I was, thinking about what's going on with the fires. You see, people leave the rural areas and they don't do any maintenance in the forests. We have a very, um, wild areas in this country. Everybody has been searching the city life, and they've been abandoning the rural areas, leaving everything to the mercy of nature. And when we get temperatures above 40 degrees, fire just emanates, you see. And if you don't take care of forests, everything burns, yeah. Which it was something that didn't happen 40 years ago. Fires was too few and far between. There's no chance a fire would start because there was someone taking care of that forest for the firewood, for the resources. There was someone because families was big, you know. So the instrument, you know, is required to be in the hands of the right person. Otherwise, things just don't work. When you want to prevent fires, you have to give the funds to exactly the right person. And how do you prevent fires? Well, you take care of the forest. You need forest keepers, you know. That's where you should invest, not in surveillance or in helicopters or in cameras, like, or, that sort of thing, or in studies, more bureaucracy, more this, that, and the. They are not doing anything to prevent the fires. They're just splitting the money between their thug friends, just feeding bureaucracy. That's what happens. When you ask someone who works behind a desk, when you ask them a practical, question, how do you prevent fires? He will come up with studies, papers. The only answer is a bureaucratic answer, that because he has no clue how the world works. He will do anything to maintain his job. He will do anything to keep him, getting paid, and the more bureaucracy there is, the better. They don't come up with practical solutions. They just come up with more bureaucracy. See, what they decided to do this year was to install millions and millions of surveillance. So they put cameras all over the place. I'm like, cameras? For what purpose? Are you trying to catch Bigfoot or something? Because you're not going to prevent fire. It doesn't make any sense. You know, the job of the few firemen, which are heroes, these are heroes. The few firemen, their job is just to protect the houses, protect the villages, because they can't stop once it starts. They are able to redirect it away from cities, away from villages and the houses. Sometimes they are incapable of, and people's property gets destroyed, but they are doing an heroic job at protecting people's houses, but they are unable to stop this force of nature. It's impossible. So it just takes its course. The fire just takes its course. Cameras are pointless. If you really want to prevent for this, you have to what? Have a gardener. Pay gardeners to maintain the forests clean. Every year, I'm responsible for this piece of forest that you are seeing right now. I plant trees. I Every year, twice a year, sometimes once a year, depends. But at least once a year, I sometimes twice, I clean everything. I clean everything. I pay people to, clean this place up. It's becoming a paradise almost. Plenty of wildlife living here. I would love to get more nuts, you know, tree nuts or nut tree, so that, squirrels. I've seen squirrels around here, but there's little food for them. I wanted to plant more of those. We'll see. It takes like 20 years for these trees to develop. That's the thing. I already got 5 or 6 of them. One died. Didn't like the transitioning. I got 5 of them, but they are small. It takes like 20 years to develop. So, so anyway, I think I'm gonna shut up. I've been talking for 15 minutes. Have a nice day.